All right, because it's a beautiful summer evening and many of the folks here have worked a full day, we are going to start this evening's program. I want to say welcome, greetings everyone on this sparkling July 26th, the 32nd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. In 1990, in New Hampshire, people with the label of intellectual and developmental disabilities were still living in Laconia at Laconia State School, which was not officially shuttered until January of 1991. Today, on this celebration day of the ADA, it is appropriate to recall a past when people with disabilities were hidden away, ignored, and denied the dignity of a robust community-based life. We are gathered here because 32 years later, there is still work to be done. So while institutions are closed, it is in fact true that people with disabilities are in a severe housing crisis. And as a community, Able New Hampshire believes that we must develop a strategic plan, a roadmap to specifically lay out a way to pool resources to ensure that we are being smart and efficient with our resources and that people with disabilities get their housing needs met. I would like to let everybody know that this webinar is being recorded so that people who couldn't join us tonight will have an opportunity to hear the information that's being shared from all of our guests. And we have enabled transcription for folks who appreciate seeing the words and not just hearing the words. We're just going to begin. I want to introduce first, DHHS, is it Jessica, Lori, then Melissa in that order?
Yeah, it'll be me first, Melissa, then Jess, then Lori. So I can introduce it here, Lisa.
Yep. I'd like to introduce Melissa Hardy. She is the Director of the Division of Long-Term Supports and Services. She oversees the Bureau of Developmental Services, the Bureau of Elderly and Adult Services, and the Bureau of Family-Centered Services. Melissa is new to DHHS, starting just this past February. Prior to state service, Melissa worked at Genesis Healthcare for 15 years. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lisa. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. So thank you for having us this evening. Like Lisa said, my name's Melissa Hardy, and one of the bureaus that I oversee is the Bureau of Developmental Services. So tonight I'm joined by Jessica Gorton, who's our waiver administrator, and Lori Vachon, who is our operations and utilization management administrator. A lot of words there. But the Bureau of Developmental Services, we contract with the 10 local area agencies to provide an array of supports and services and resources for individuals and their families with developmental disabilities or acquired brain disorders. So quickly, we're going to review what our waivers are for services, what they can provide to support folks in the community, and also what they don't cover, what they don't support as it relates to access to housing. So I am going to advance the next slide. Okay. So for the Division of Long-Term Supports and Services, we have a total of 4 Medicaid waivers. They're called the 1915C waiver. So they're really related to home and community-based services. And that's part of the Social Security Act, so the Federal Social Security Act. So these waivers permit states to furnish an array of home and community-based services that assist Medicaid recipients to live in the community and to avoid institutionalization. So in New Hampshire, the 2 waivers that we're going to really talk about tonight are the developmental disabilities waiver and the acquired brain disorder waiver. So our developmental disabilities waiver is for individuals that experience a developmental disability as specified in New Hampshire law. Our acquired brain disorder waiver is for folks who are over the age of 22, who have sustained a brain or spinal cord injury prior to the age of 60. We also have an in-home supports waiver, which is for children or young adults who have a developmental disability and significant medical or behavioral concerns. And lastly, we have our choices for independence waiver, which is an alternative to nursing home placement for adults 18 years or older who are aging and or have a physical disability. So that's just a quick overview of our approved Medicaid waivers to support people in their homes and the community. I'm now going to turn it over to Jess, I believe, to talk about some of the available services.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Gorton. Thank you for joining this evening. So in New Hampshire, as Melissa said, we have several waivers, and a lot of times folks will say, Jess, what's a waiver? What does a waiver do? And, as we started to reference, it allows certain services to be provided, typically or always services that are above and beyond what traditional Medicaid will cover. We often refer to this as Medicaid state plan. Our waiver is really our agreement with our federal partners that says, hey, we in New Hampshire would like to provide these additional services above and beyond what New Hampshire state plan Medicaid provides, and to these folks. So when Melissa was reading off the group of individuals, an individual who experiences disability, for example, an individual over the age of 22 who experiences a brain or spinal cord injury, those are the folks that we say, hey, CMS, these are the individuals that we are looking to bring additional supports to. So with that in mind, we've added new services over the last year and a half to our DD and ABD waivers. And we like to get the word out about them as much as we can, because first and foremost, a lot of folks, we all agree, you have to know about it to actually be able to access it and start the conversation. So even though the conversation tonight is a little bit more focused than a lot of our services, we still wanted to bring them up. Maybe if you haven't seen some of these services yet, point you to our website where you can go and get a little bit more information. And I'll drop that in the chat in just a few moments when I hand it over to my colleague, Lori Vachon, but where you can provide an overview. You can read the full document if you want. They're each a few hundred pages. So if that's not your style, if it is your style, you're definitely my folks, you're my people. If that is not your style, though, we also have listed right underneath each full waiver, an overview presentation that kind of puts it in a little bit more of a easy to reference format. And we always encourage folks, if you are accessing services through one of our waivers, you read a new service and you're wanting to learn more about it, please reach out to your area agency, your service coordinator, the Bureau of Developmental Services. Any one of us can help to get you to the right place to talk about how these services might be helpful. If you are wishing to bring them, explore them, make them to be part of your person-centered plan, your service agreement, and would be helpful for you in accessing the community. So for today, Melissa, could you please switch the slide? So for today's conversation, specific to how a waiver might be able to help to support housing. At this point in time, waiver funds, Medicaid funds in general, cannot be used for the costs associated with a home itself or the upkeep of a home. We kind of collectively refer to that as room and board. We can't use waiver and Medicaid funds for room and board. What we can do with a waiver, though, are access those supports and allow access for those supports to an individual within their home. So once that home is identified, moved into home or apartment, we can bring some services in to provide, and we're going to go into a little more detail on some of the more commonly accessed services, but to provide those supports within the home, even though we can't pay for the cost of room and board. And with that, I would like to introduce you all to my colleague, the wonderful Lori Vachon. Lori.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Jess. So again, my name is Lori Vachon, and what we wanted to do tonight is focus on a few of our waiver services that would pertain to the topic of housing and supporting individuals to live independently within their communities. So some of the services that we are going to talk about today are more focused in that area, but as Jess said, we have a much broader service menu on our waiver. And our time is limited, so we wanted to just make sure that we were focusing in regards to housing. So through our waiver services, individuals are eligible to receive service coordination, which is worth its weight in gold for services in assisting individuals to access and apply for housing supports and services. I think later in the presentation, we're going to hear from some of our experts about what some of those resources are. But just for an example, a service coordinator can assist an individual in applying for fuel assistance, housing vouchers, subsidized housing, food stamps, all of those types of services that would assist an individual in living independently and obtaining resources to help obtain the funds to do so. The other area that we wanted to focus on for a waiver service is what we call community support services. This is a service that enables individuals through a person-centered plan in developing what is it that I will need to live independently? What supports will I benefit from to help me reach my goals of living on my own and any other goals that I've set aside for myself? So those community support services can start when an individual is actually living within their family home for up to 2 years to help prepare that individual for independent living. So they offer all types of transitional supports to get ready for the big day when you move out. The second part is they're ongoing for when an individual moves into their own place for the first time. And they can be very flexible as identified in the person-centered plan about what is it that I need to be successful. Things about household management, attending and paying bills, personal care supports that I may need, how to work in social situations with my neighbors that may live around me. It's a variety of services that could be outlined in the individual service agreement as to what supports they're looking for. Some of the community support services can be offered from anywhere from 2 hours a week up to 30 hours a week. And if there's a special example of someone who may need more than 30 hours a week, there's an allowance to ask for that special request as well. Some of the other services in the waiver that might apply and benefit an individual who's living independently include environmental modifications. I'm just going to give a quick example of that. It could be a grab bar, a ramp for an apartment that I need to help me access that apartment. Personal emergency response systems that could include, as just one example, a medication device. I'm able to take my own medications, but I might need reminders that can be set up that can go off at my hour of sleep to remind me to take my medications, and it could alert a family or an individual of my choice if I took the medications or not. Assistive technology is another area of supports that we can look at, as well as non-medical transportation. Quick example of non-medical transportation could include the fact that some people don't have the ability to drive and feel like they need to find an apartment within walking distance of a grocery store. Non-medical transportation allows individuals to expand their search for that, which would include the fact that I might be able to order Hannaford to go, and I need transportation to go pick it up. So I could access non-medical transportation that's identified in my service agreement for assisting me to go to the grocery store and pick up my Hannaford to go order. So that does allow some extra flexibility in determining where I might choose to live within my community when I do not have, the ability to drive myself. So those are some very quick examples of our services that could be utilized to assist with independent living in New Hampshire. That is the end of our quick presentation, Lisa. I'm not sure how you want to proceed from that. If you want
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you, Lori, so much. That was, you guys did a great overview, and we have time for questions at the end. We have a packed agenda, so we want to make sure that everyone gets to share their information, and we will save questions till the end. Next up, we have Ignatius McLellan. He is the Managing Director of Multifamily Housing Division at New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. Previously, he was the Managing Director of Home Ownership Division at New Hampshire Housing. He has also worked at a nonprofit housing tax credit syndicator, Fannie Mae, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He is a universal subject matter expert in all ways. Before working full-time on housing, Ignatius practiced law for over 13 years. Ignatius attended Boston College and the University of Maine School of Law. His true passion is bringing groups to El Salvador to work with the community on various development projects, including building homes with families. Casas Dignas, dignified home. Thank you so much, Ignatius.
All right, well, thank you to Lisa and to Abel for including me and including New Hampshire Housing. So I'm going to quickly cover some of the resources that are available at New Hampshire Housing in terms of multifamily housing, just to give folks a lay of the land. And we do welcome public participation and input at various times in the year, and Abel has participated in those, and we would ask you to continue to participate because it's just good information for us. So I'm gonna, let me get rid of my, because I want to get rid of that. Does that get rid of me? How do I hide that? There we go. I want to talk just briefly about two types of housing as I think about it in terms of what we do. One is the issue of accessible, and the other one is supportive. I want to touch briefly on 811 project-based rental assistance. Dee is going to cover the voucher aspect, but I'm going to cover a specific program. Very quickly about financing options. Want to make a comment about local approvals, and then do mention one program that we do with Granite State Independent Living. So accessible housing. So regardless of the funding source, new construction and substantial alteration with 5 or more units obviously requires a certain level of design accessibility. And so when we do new production or substantial alterations, there's accessibility of those. So 5% of the dwelling units, or at least one unit, has to be fully accessible for people with mobility disabilities. Additionally, 2%, or at least one unit, must be accessible for hearing and visual disabilities. And then an important part is all common areas must be accessible in the projects. So that's accessible housing, meaning when New Hampshire Housing finances the construction or rehabilitation of housing, there is an accessibility component to it. But I also want to point out that we do have specific funds that go towards supportive housing. And the way we've defined supportive housing is housing for individuals or households whose lives are improved by supportive services. And then there's a list of individuals who fall under the definition of supportive housing and the like. And so it's important to know our board of directors has made a significant commitment to doing supportive housing, and it's something that we report separately to our board on. So the other thing I wanted to mention is most of our programs on the multifamily side are financing tools, meaning money that goes towards the construction of or rehabilitation of housing. But that doesn't always work, because for kind of getting to the lower income level, you need rental assistance. And so we do have a partnership with the State Department of Health and Human Services, the Bureau for Mental Health Services, where we find a unit and the Bureau works with community mental health centers to find applicants who could go into these vacant units. And it's very specific in terms of at or below 30%. AMI means area median income. And they are folks who are eligible for community-based long-term services. And this has been a nice successful program where the state has to apply to HUD, get the rental assistance, and then the person responsible works with our finance team to get developers to do units to take the 811s. So our two main programs, and I'm not going to get into the technical part, and are the 9% low-income housing tax credit program, which basically is the #1 production program in the United States. And the way we influence what type of housing gets built under the low-income housing tax credit program is with scoring. And so one of the discussions that we've had with ABLE, and I'm sure we will continue, is whether our scoring is meeting the needs of all communities in New Hampshire and the like. For example, we give additional points if units are set aside that provide supportive services. At the same time, we also do tax exempt bonds, which is another way to fund new housing. And then on the supportive housing side, we will put out and shoot me an email if you'd like to be on that notice, supportive housing notice, where we say, okay, we've got this money to go towards supportive housing, send us an application and let's get that money out the door. I would also note that kind of unique this year, while we've received some money from the state of New Hampshire under the affordable housing program, Governor has made a commitment to affordable housing, and New Hampshire Housing is going to receive $10 million to put towards housing. And then the state will have its own pot of $50 million to put towards new housing production and the like. And then just my comment on local approvals. And I mean, in order to get the financing with New Hampshire Housing, the developer has to go through the local zoning and approval process. And I just want to point out, and glad to, if I can figure out how to share this in the chat, just share a really important joint statement from HUD and from the Department of Justice about local land use practices and how fair housing applies. Most of the time, we think about fair housing from the perspective of everything from kind of, are you letting people in or keeping people out? But fair housing actually goes back to the local approval process and the local land use process. And I point this out because I was in a town which I will not name, and the question came up, how many children who will need special education are going to live here? And I told the planning board, it is illegal for you to ask the question, and it's illegal for me to answer the question. But I will tell you the local land use boards, which I know they're trying to do what they think is best for their towns, it is important that they remember there's a fair housing component to their decisions, and they're not allowed to discriminate against people who are in certain classes, which includes disabled and frankly, families with children and the like. And then my last thing I wanted to talk about is New Hampshire Housing has been funding a program with Granite State Independent Living. Excuse me, it's an accessibility pilot program where we initially were trying to make these loans to improve accessibility in homes, and it was just clear it didn't work. So our board is allocating money every year that we provide to Granite State Independent Living. And if folks meet certain income guidelines, there are things that we can do to help out. And I'll just note and finish with the following. That we got a beautiful email from a person whose bathroom was modified, and she was thanking us and GSIL because it was the first time in a decade that she got to take a shower without having an aide with her. And I will tell you, I've done a lot of things in housing. I think that's maybe one of my better moments. But again, it's the commitment of New Hampshire Housing. We've done almost $1 million. We've funded 155 projects with an average grant of 7,000. And so I would just say, contact Granite State Independent Living or give me a call. And the conclusion is, New Hampshire Housing, along with our board, is committed to the creation of housing for everyone in the state. And we do appreciate and look forward to input from advocacy organizations, including ABLE, to help us make better decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignatius.
That's my comment.
I have a quick follow-up question. If someone gets their services through an area agency, can their area agency apply for the GSIL, apply for the home modification through GSIL, or do they have to actually be a client of GSIL? Does GSIL act as a conduit?
Yeah, so GSIL, we provide them the cash and they provide the staffing, and it's an open program. It's not, the restrictions are related to either you own the home or a family member owns the home and there's a person who could use accessibility improvements. It lives in the home, but there's no requirement that they be a GSIL client.
I hope we're going to have to follow up as an organization just to cross the T and dot the I to make sure that the developmental disability service providers understand that there is this pool of money. Can someone from DHHS quickly let us know if this pool of funds are known to our DD system service providers? Well, this is
Yeah,
a
so
We're all like, who's gonna talk
it's like,
first?
I feel like I'm on a game show, like who's gonna hit their unmute button first, Lisa? So I just wanted to make an overall comment. This could be known to our area agencies and our service coordinators, but we also offer environmental modification funds through our waiver services for home modifications. So oftentimes individuals who are in receipt of waiver services would be pursuing that through a service offered through the waiver.
Sure, but oftentimes budgets fall short of being able to provide that. So this is a nice pool of a nice additional pool, and ABLE New Hampshire is going to have to send a memo out to the service provider network to remind them all that there is this location.
Yes.
So Andrew, if you could please
Yeah.
take a note of that, and we will be sure in August to send that out to our service provider. Ignatius, thank you for reminding us also about the Fair Housing Act. That is a tool for the advocacy community to go to planning boards and zoning boards and even to school boards and remind them that fair housing practice is federal law. And that is a way for us as members of the community to take action to make sure that fair zoning and planning practices are in place, particularly in rural towns that have restrictive zoning rules. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to have time for question and answers, I think. Next up, we have also from New Hampshire Housing tonight, Dee Pouliot. She is the managing Director of the Assisted Housing Division and has been with New Hampshire Housing since 1985. Dee clearly has enormous amounts of institutional and historical knowledge about housing in New Hampshire. In her current position, she oversees the administration of the Housing Choice Voucher Program to ensure compliance with program regulations and oversees the Housing Services Program to ensure full integration of these activities with other program administration. Prior to this position, Deanne was the Director of Asset Management and was responsible for the development and implementation of the long-term compliance monitoring and asset management programs for the multifamily financing portfolio and contract administration functions. She holds a bachelor's degree in human services from Springfield. And Dee, I bet you that you are happier now working on this side than on the finance side. Welcome and thank you, Deanne.
Oops. You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you for having me, inviting me. Can you see my screen okay?
We can.
Okay. I have 3 versions of this PowerPoint, so I hope I shared the right one. I had too many going on. I hope it is. So let's get started. Going to talk about the Housing Choice Voucher Program and try to, explain how the program works, what it means when a voucher is pulled from the wait list, and how we determine who gets pulled from the wait list, and what happens after an applicant is pulled, and how to get the voucher and how to get it quickly and paperwork that we need. So the Housing Choice Voucher Program, also known as Section 8. So there's kind of 2 pieces of Section 8. This is the voucher program is a tenant-based Section 8 federal subsidy. HUD tried to move away from the term Section 8 a while ago, but that branding has stuck, I think, for years. But so I may refer to it as voucher, just a voucher in short, but it's the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And we determine New Hampshire Housing administers Housing Choice vouchers. We work statewide, which is a little different than some of the local housing authorities. And like I said, it's tenant-based, means the assisted unit is selected by the family. It's one of the features that makes this program very popular because the household gets to choose where they want to live or purchase a house. Actually, they could purchase or they can rent different type of housing. New Hampshire Housing, we administer just over 4,200 vouchers. There were over 11,000 vouchers in the state, and those are administered by 18 local housing authorities. So those are your larger cities like Manchester, Nashua, Concord, Portsmouth, and they're all on our website. And I think in Tim's handout, he has those as well. And an applicant can apply to more than one housing authority. They can be a multiple waiting list. It just gets a little tricky because we at New Hampshire Housing update our waiting list in April of each year. And it's sometimes confusing for applicants not knowing where did they apply or how many housing authorities did they apply. And then their application, unfortunately, could be inactivated if they don't respond to waiting list updates. So often they could have a family member or a guardian or someone who helps them in that so that they can stay on the waiting list. The vouchers can be applied to home ownership. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And we have what HUD calls special purpose vouchers. These are special voucher allocations allocated by Congress specific to veterans or the mainstream program, which is kind of that 811 program, mainstream meaning for non-elderly persons with a disability, family reunification, and emergency housing vouchers for households who are exiting or in the shelter system, working with a continuum of care agency. We just updated and purged the waiting list, and there's still more than 5,500 applicants on the waiting list. We mailed out about 7,000 letters, and that's how many get purged through the waiting list update process. So the wait times vary, and every housing authority is different. HUD allows each housing authority to set its preferences based on local need. So a local housing authority, most of them keep it simple and may give a residency preference that someone in Concord comes before someone who doesn't. We don't have a residency preference because we're statewide. Our preferences are kind of broad in scope. We have a lot of preferences, and we have to work within those special programs. So sometimes they have a longer wait time because there are fewer vouchers. So of those 5,500 people on the waiting list, about 78% have a disability. So when they apply and they have a disability, we put them on the waiting list. We also know they qualify for mainstream. You know, they may qualify, or a non-elderly person with disability voucher. We put them on everything they could qualify for and see which one is the shortest. So there aren't as many of those special purpose vouchers, and there are thousands of people waiting for one. So what we call our higher ranking preferences, these have a 6 to 12 month wait, and that is someone with household member with a terminal illness. And we define a terminal illness as death is expected to occur as verified by a medical provider within 24 months. We have the choices for independency, formerly known as HCBIC. And if I uploaded the right PowerPoint, I have a slide explaining that a little bit more. And I appreciate even what Jessica, Lori, and Melissa was saying about the whole Medicaid waiver and the CFI and the different categories of CFI. We include them all, but that's a preference that has a. Right now, we're pulling CFI each month. Right now, we always pull from our waiting list as long as we have vouchers available. And then we have preference. We have some transitional housing programs that we have memorandums of agreement with these agencies, and that it's transitional housing with case management. The longer wait, majority of applicants are on the rent burdened at risk of homeless preference. That is pretty much almost everybody on the waiting list that they're paying more than half of their income for rent. And then we also have equal with that is victims of domestic violence and veterans who are not part of the veterans vouchers. So we have vouchers designated for veterans under VASH, the Veterans Administration Supportive Housing. And I want to say these are regular veterans, not necessarily homeless veterans, but veterans. Okay, so here's the CFI. I put a slide on that. Hopefully this is helpful. And my friends with DHHS can correct me if anything is wrong, but this is our definition of CFI, or what we put in our paperwork. We've had this CFI preference I think since the mid-90s. It started as this HOPE BI. We had a special program, HOPE for Elderly Independence, and that kind of turned into then Access 2000, which was nursing home transition, and then it was HCBIC. And so we have this kind of broad CFI preference. And it does mean I don't even know if Katie Beckett is still used, so my lingo could be a little outdated, but it's the whole, any Medicaid waiver program that we talked about earlier with the ECI, the DD, or the ABD. We have right now on the program 420 participants of our 4,000 who have a CFI preference, and over 250 of them are non-elderly. We also include with CFI applicants who are transitioning out of a nursing home, even though we know they don't get CFI services until they actually exit the nursing home, they are still eligible, and they receive a preference. The verification from that, we have a form. It goes to their CFI service provider, and they just check off that they're CFI eligible, and the voucher, it's a very quick turnaround time. This chart I added, I share it with other groups. It's a little profile of voucher. The main point is because people say, why is the list so long? And whoops, well, where did I go? I didn't. Why is the list so long? And if you look back from 1998 to today, rents have doubled, average subsidy, HAP is housing assistance payments, has doubled, time on the program has more than doubled, but income has not kept up with the rising costs of everything else. So the average household used to make 11,000, now they're making almost 18,000. They cannot afford their rent. So therefore they're on the program a long time. So all the vouchers are in use right now. So we have, the 4,200 vouchers. When I say they're all in use, every voucher's been issued, but we have about 300 searching, meaning they can't find an apartment. So we're always, every month, about 25 people go off the program, and then we pull, to fill those 25 slots, we pull about 100 people from the waiting list, because we know not everybody's going to be successful, and some fall out and some lease up, some don't. So we're, always measuring our success rate and our pull rate. So even though it may look like there were 200 vouchers that weren't used last year, it means they didn't lease up. They have vouchers. We give lots of extensions, but in this market especially, very low income people with a voucher are often at a disadvantage, because landlords legally can say no and don't have to accept the voucher. And it could be because rents don't work or for various reasons. So that just kind of shows why the average person's on the program, 9, 10 years. They can have it as long as they're eligible. They can have it as long as they need it. So how to apply? We have an online application. They can call, and they're placed on the waiting list by date of application and preference. When they come to the top, the voucher, they'll get a letter in the mail. We do everything by mail. And this is just like informational, but what they need to provide. So if you're working with someone who recently came to the top of the waiting list, or you're working with someone who is going to qualify for CFI, they're going to come up on the waiting list rather quickly. Getting that information and everything will expedite the process. Sometimes the delays are just in, they don't have copies. Not everybody has copies of all these things right away, but it's a matter of, gathering the paperwork and getting what we need to determine their eligibility. During this time, they have to, locate a place to live. That's been a challenge right now. They can, we give them 60 days as the initial time, but they can always ask for an extension. The additional 60 days is easy. If they have a disability, they can ask for reasonable accommodation for additional time. And extensions are based upon availability, meaning, do we have a voucher available? So like I said, right now we have 300 people with a voucher for 100 slots, about 120 slots. If they're all successful, then we stop pulling from the waiting list, or we can't give extensions, and we kind of slow down. But we plan on attrition. We plan on, for every voucher that's issued, we track barriers. So we know, we try to estimate someone's, we want everybody to be successful, but we try to gauge that based on what we call maximized leasing. We issue more vouchers than we have available slots, because we know through history and experience that not everybody will be successful. And if they all are, then through attrition, we'll kind of get back on within our HUD numbers. So the request for tenancy approval form, that is basically what the voucher holder has. That is the form that they and the landlord fill out when they find an apartment, landlord agrees to the program, all goes well. Landlord and the client fill it out. That means the landlord's going to rent to them. Client wants that unit. And that is what triggers us to contact the landlord, brief the landlord, negotiate rents if needed, and schedule the inspection. Go out, do the inspection, we get the paperwork back, and the client moves in. It can be a very seamless process when they can locate a unit. Obviously, that's the hard part right now. Oops, where did I go? Oh, so landlord participation, right, is critical. I don't want to say that we're always going to have a waiting list. We don't have a program without landlords. We don't have a program. So we have 5,500 applicants. We know we have the need. We need the landlords. We have 1,900 participating landlords. We try to, and I think this is what we're all trying to do a little bit today, right, is get increased landlord participation. How can we sell the program to landlords? Why do we have 1,900? How do we keep them happy, right? It's getting new landlords, retaining landlords. Customer service is an agency goal. It's a division goal with staff in the division. And there's a lot of good reasons for the landlord to participate in the program. We have a lot of landlords who have made a living off this program. It's a great program for them. When COVID hit and we had 500, I think, participants who lost their job or had a financial loss of income, we paid their entire rent. And landlords were, very happy. There was a moratorium, they couldn't evict, and they got all their rent. There's a financial loss of income we pay. Even during the stay-at-home order, everything we do, we pay. It's electronic, it's done, it happens. We work remote. First business day of the month, landlord's guaranteed payment. The landlords have a portal, all their inspection results are in there. Fair market rents, are they fair? I don't know. HUD publishes them based on their methodology, but HUD also gives a waiver this year and lets housing authorities set their payment standard or our rent limit. We can go to 120% above the fair market rent, which New Hampshire Housing has done, so that we can compete better in the private market. We try to say it feels good, pay it forward. I think it does. We have a lot of landlords who really who are proud of that, who call us looking for, I want some referrals, and they like the program, and they have very, very positive, good experiences with the clients. There's no guarantee you're ever going to get the perfect client, but if they do their tenant selection and enforce leases and the client follows the rules, there's so many good experiences. We have some incentives that are new, and the Foster Youth to Independence, Family Unification, Mainstream, and VASH on July 1st, our board recently, these were pilots, but now they made it a program, and we expanded it to all voucher holders. That provides that up to $1,000 sign-on bonus. The emergency housing vouchers, it's a little bit different program, but they also get the $1,000 sign-on bonus. We have found that that's a good negotiating tool, sometimes with the rent. If the landlord can't come down on the rent, but they know they're going to get $1,000, it's worked out well. And once it's a new landlord, they get the $1,000, but every time they have a vacant unit and rent to another voucher holder, they get another $500 for each one after that. So we have some landlords who, the goal is we want to be the landlord's first call when they have a vacant apartment. And that has, we've developed some relationships with some good landlords. I say big landlords, like they might have, 75 apartments, in several towns. So they're not the big property owners, but they're landlords that, they're good landlords, they have decent properties, and they're calling us when they have vacant units, and they're getting $500 each time. We have on our website a vacant market unit. Landlords, this is why we said the free marketing. Landlords can list their vacant units on our website, and we share that list with voucher holders to help in their housing search. There aren't a lot on there right now. Landlords don't have a lot of vacant apartments to list, or they don't want all the phone calls. Some of them just call us instead. And then we have 2 staff, we call them expediters. The 2 staff who work with all voucher holders. They track their barriers. They set up Zillow alerts. You know, they kind of do like a housing plan with them to try to see what their needs are and work with them when they have a vacant unit. You got to jump on it. There aren't many vacant units and they don't last long. The directory of assisted housing, sorry, that's backwards, it's not housing assisted. That lists housing financed by New Hampshire Housing under the low income housing tax credit program that Ignatius was talking about. So anything financed by New Hampshire Housing, landlord is required or cannot say no to a voucher unless it's for tenant selection. So if for some reason the voucher holder does not meet their tenant selection criteria with poor landlord references or criminal activity, then they can deny them, but they can't deny them just because they have a voucher. So often as someone's issued a voucher, we give them the list of tax credit properties in their community and suggest they apply right away and get on those waiting lists. Sometimes those waiting lists are 6, 12 months, and we can extend the voucher to try as long as we can to try to work with that and give them the time they need to make that connection work. We use some of these some sites to, you know, track or refer, you know, voucher holders to those sites. The 2 expediters set alerts for those. And we do a lot of rent negotiations. So sometimes the landlord may come down $100 a month. So often we tell the voucher holder, just have the landlord call us. Let us, I don't want to say work our magic, but let us try to see what the landlord, you know, what we can do between the incentive and negotiating rent and sell the program. You know, there's salespeople. Then the inspection, you know, I was in Washington a few weeks ago and they were talking about landlord participation in the program, and HUD said they hear from some states that landlords don't participate because the inspection process takes so long. And I thought, oh, good, that is an area we've never had to worry about. We have 4 inspectors who are on the road every day. And the last thing we want a landlord to do is wait for us, because they have choices and they'll rent to someone else and that voucher holder will lose the unit. So that is an area that we have not, it has not been a problem. I hope it never is, but we do try to get that inspection done right away. If the apartment doesn't, if it fails inspection, we work with the landlord to get what they need to do to pass inspection. Some of the common things may be like a hardwired carbon monoxide detector or something that, you know, outlets aren't grounded or things that the landlord can fix. And it's not any stricter than any life safety building code. It should be a place that the landlord would live in, you and I would live in. We're not asking for luxury housing. We're asking for safety and sanitary housing that anybody would want to live in. What I said a little bit on the what we call the VAMO, which is a voucher assisted mortgage option, that we have about 150 voucher holders who have used their voucher to purchase a home, and instead of getting help with rent, they get help with their home ownership expenses. And it's been a great, I would say about half of those are persons with a disability. They find a lot of security in having, whether it's a condo or manufactured housing, that they don't have to worry about rent increases each year or the landlord selling the building. They find security in owning their own home. You know, home ownership has its own expenses and sometimes challenges, but we've had a couple that just said, yeah, this isn't for me. I'm going to sell and go back and be a renter, and they get to keep their voucher. They weren't foreclosed on. They didn't default. they just didn't think home ownership was a good option for them. Many of them get financing from our home ownership division at New Hampshire Housing. We have a lot of first-time home buyer programs and down payment assistance options, or some go through rural development. You know, there's different, we have, I think, about 80 some odd voucher holders right now working on home ownership goals. And we have home ownership counselors on staff, which help them work on their credit scores and walk them through the approval process to, then they can work with a lender to get approved and use the voucher for home ownership. I think that's the last one. Did I go over my time?
Don't worry about it, Dee. It was
Okay.
fantastically rich presentation and worth every minute. And I think you have, it's fine. I do have one quick follow-up question. Can you make it a little bit more real by telling us how the voucher applies when you're a homeowner? Does it contribute to the mortgage payment? Or how does that, what happens? How does the, if you have a quick explanation for how the amount is determined for that contribution to the mortgage payment?
The
Or is that-
calculation's not that much different than a rental. For Ignatius knows best on the home, when he was in home ownership division, he and I have been, I think, been in every division. It almost, they count it like as a second income. So say in rent, if they were renting and they were getting help with $1,000 a month, they use that $1,000 a month as that's $12,000 a year in income. They almost count it like a second job. So it helps them qualify for a larger mortgage. Then that $1,000 we were paying in rent, all things being equal, depending on the mortgage and all that, but we would pretty much give them that $1,000 to pay their mortgage. So we look at home ownership, the calculation's a little different. We have to look at their mortgage, taxes, insurance. You know, we look at home ownership expenses instead of rent and utilities. They're kind of the same. And if they're a one-person household, they still get the 1-bedroom payment standard. And we still deduct 30% of their income, like we do for any renter. And then the difference is, you know, the subsidy that we would pay whether they purchase or rent. So it adds another option to their, you know, we've had, I think we talked a little bit once we had some parents who have purchased for their adult children. Some disabled, some not. You know, but if, well, actually they were disabled because HUD only allows someone to rent from a relative if they have a disability as reasonable accommodation. So they can, you know, use that and rent from a relative, or they can buy it with their parents, buy it, and they buy it off their parents, or, you know, there's been a couple different solutions to that, but I think the downside on the home ownership side for many of our clients is they are very low income and there are maintenance needs in home ownership. And that can be difficult for them, or if they lose their exemption, you know, the town, I think we heard the city of Laconia eliminated the tax exemption for people with disabilities. Maybe, I think it's just for elderly or vice versa. So that, you know, it's a cost. It's a cost with someone with restricted income that they're burdened by that. And that's where they could sell and go back to rental, but they really want to push through and get to the home ownership side.
Sure. Well, thank you. And I'm sure there are the questions are piling up. So thank you so much, Dee. I do think you bring a bit of magic to your job, and there is always that element in trying to find a house or a home. So it's really exciting that you have landlords who have good experiences because they can provide testimonials for landlords, private landlords who are considering the program, and that is, that's great. So next up, we have Tim McKernan. He is Able New Hampshire's Director of Policy and Advocacy. Tim is a product of the New Hampshire public school system. He completed a Bachelor of Arts degree in politics and society at UNH in 2011 and a Juris Doctorate at the UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law in 2014. Tim is autistic and has a diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and lives with chronic pain. He is a parent to a first grader with disabilities. He has worked in issue advocacy in New Hampshire since 2007 on many issues, including healthcare access, voting rights, and campaign finance reform. Welcome, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for the introduction. Also, in the context of housing, I would like to note that I've had my own challenges with housing. I've been housing secure for quite a bit of my adult life. I've experienced homelessness on a couple of different occasions when I was younger. And I have been in situations where I've been taken advantage of by roommates financially. So I do understand a lot of the issues that folks are dealing with and looking at. So we're going to look at some of the paths to home. First of all, looking at the problem that we're dealing with, there is a severe shortage of affordable, accessible, appropriately supportive housing for the developmental disability community. And part of the problem is this, that the service system, the way that it's structured now, relies on families to house their loved ones indefinitely. And then the parents age, the living situation becomes more difficult for everyone concerned. And adults want to live on their own. They want to have their own home and their own path to home. And sometimes there are a lot of different ways to get there. Now, the Bureau of Developmental Services does recognize that housing is limited, as folks have said, but there's no real mechanism to address the issue. So we're looking to find a way to bring more access to affordable, accessible, supportive housing in an integrative setting. We believe that housing is a human right. In the rights that are afforded to people with disabilities, there's no expectation or presumption that people with disabilities have a right to a home. But we believe that everyone has the right to their own home, or a home where they feel comfortable and safe. Some of the core elements of independent living means an individual must have at least the same level of an access to privacy, freedom of movement, control, and choice over their environment, and also the legal rights that are available to anyone else who's a renter or an owner. And while some people do need 24 hours a day of support to live safely and happily in the community, we believe that there's a way to do that and still be a full participant in civic life. And we believe that every individual will take their own path to home. So what it boils down to is really finding a solution for your own family and navigating all of these great resources and programs that have been talked about. Requires that we go through a process of first looking at what are our resources. And that includes access to the programs that have been described here, but also what are the family's resources? Do they already have property that they're living on? Do they have another property that's available to them? But then looking at also what options or what our priorities are, and that requires the young person who's looking to live in a supportive home. What do they think their plan's going to be over the next few years? Now, not everyone needs a forever plan. Particularly young people often need a plan for right now. But what's important is making sure that you have security in your home. But there are many different options for doing that. And that can mean living closer to family and friends. That could mean living where you want to be around people your own age. Support needs also play into this because of the shortage in support staff and housing for those folks. sometimes a geographic area becomes untenable because of lack of access to support. Some people want to live in more of a city or in a walking area. Some people want to live in a more rural environment. And you have to think about what type of transportation you need access to. And if you're able to get that through waiver services or through another situation. So finally, once you choose that path, you're going to move forward on it. But in the larger picture, we're also asking folks to get involved in creating solutions on the systemic level. And this is a global problem for all communities in our state. Housing is at a massive shortage right now, but the disability community is feeling that pinch really strongly. So we need to find a way to pool our resources and strategically build more options. So back to the decisions that families have to make, we're dealing with very limited resources, and this is basically it for most people. And for the population we're talking about under a developmental disability waiver, they should most likely be eligible for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. There are the Medicaid benefits that can be used for home alteration. In minor cases. There are also numerous federal grants and loans that may be available to people of low income, people living in rural areas, and also for people who are living in a disaster area. There are additional funds there for home modification. And then we're back to family savings. So federal entitlement programs are difficult to navigate. And they are limited, and there's really no one place to look for all of the information that families need, folks with disabilities in the state. So we are looking to get all that information together, and that's why we started the Able New Hampshire Housing Task Force, so that we can meet together with other housing stakeholders to develop and to implement solutions, and hopefully come to the point where we have that comprehensive roadmap to the future that addresses our housing needs as a community. Right now, the options are limited. Excuse me. So we have the voucher program, the Housing Choice Voucher Program that you described in detail. And as Ignatius pointed out, there are other subsidized housing properties available. And as other folks, and as Deanne Ignatius said, there are other vouchers available through local housing authorities. There is the option of building an accessory dwelling unit. There's the option of home ownership. And then there's specialized housing in congregate settings, which is often a default option for many families, particularly coming straight out of institutionalization or situations like that. Here at Able New Hampshire, we are trying to advance robust community-based lives. So that last option, specialized housing, typically does not meet the standard of secure housing because there's not the renter's rights from being on a lease or owner's rights from owning their own home. And again, we believe that people with significant disabilities can have the supports that they need and live in an integrated setting in the community. So I'm not going to describe what Dee did again, but the Housing Choice Voucher Program, I think is really a strong option for a lot of people. Unfortunately, it is limited by the housing market, the number of vouchers and landlord participation, but the benefits of being able to have a long-term plan for housing, being under renter's rights and having that control over your own environment, the assistance of a caseworker in finding housing when you go through the New Hampshire Housing Choice Voucher Program. And the CFI DD preference is a really powerful benefit that I don't think can be matched. And that may be really the way for a lot of people to be able to get that housing that they need. The program is highly structured. It's been around for a long time. And this is really, I think, the best way to go for a lot of people. But we're going to have to work on the landlord participation the housing market and increase the number of vouchers. So second option that's available to folks, we can find, oops, I'm sorry, going back to the other housing authority voucher or subsidy programs. A lot of the benefits are similar. It is it's a reliable subsidy to the rent that's going to be continually going to the landlord on a monthly basis. And by going through other housing authorities, you can access maybe additional inventory if it's subsidized housing specifically, additional vouchers. As Dee said, there are a number of other vouchers that are out there in their hands. So even if New Hampshire Housing's vouchers are all taken up, there may be one in your area. There may be additional support for the landlords in different areas, and additional resources to assist with finding housing based on that local housing authority's staffing and what programs they offer. Another benefit to looking at other solutions is that there's age-restricted subsidized housing buildings that some people with disabilities might actually find attractive if they prefer a quieter environment or other elements of living in a building with more support and access for medical support. And people with disabilities can qualify for many of these age-restricted units and buildings, regardless of their own age. So the third option that is available is building an accessory dwelling unit. If the family member is able to receive a waiver under the reasonable accommodation option that Dee mentioned, then there can be additional revenue that comes back to the family instead of it going to another landlord. One of the benefits is proximity to family and still having the benefits of that support. And the person in the dwelling unit will have renter's rights. Some of the drawbacks are it is close to family and maybe the individual wants a little bit more distance. So they can have more of a sense and experience of independence. The time and money investment up front can be considerable depending upon what construction challenges exist. The town rules vary for accessory dwelling units. There was a law that was passed that became effective June 1st, 2017 in New Hampshire that states that an attached accessory dwelling unit will be allowed as a matter of right on a single family plot unless the town passes rules to govern those units. So looking at the rules, it can be more complicated. Now, accessory dwelling units must be accompanied by an increase in water and sewage capacity. The rules must require that they be larger than 750 square feet, which is pretty tiny. There must be an interior door between the accessory dwelling unit and the main house, and it must meet general lodging requirements. So there should be access to water, a bathroom, food preparation area. The rules may require that the homeowner live in either the accessory dwelling unit or the main home. And this may be a good creative solution for families where the original caretakers are aging, and maybe they would like to be in the accessory dwelling units and the person with a disability purchases the home. But again, this is a more complicated option that will require consulting with some professional help and experts. Now, the rules may also limit how many accessory dwelling units are allowed or how many unrelated tenants are allowed. There may be design or aesthetic standards. If you look at the previous slide, you can see that they kind of blended in the same style, the same colors, the same framing. So it looks like the same kind of house. It's not just something else tacked on. And the rules may require parking for whoever's in the accessory dwelling unit, whether or not they have a car. And again, these are the rules that are imposed by the town. The rules may not require a separate water and sewage hookup or separate septic system. They may not require that the interior doors be kept unlocked. And they may not limit accessory dwelling units to only one bedroom, and they may not require a family relationship between the landlord and the renter. So this means that someone could open up an accessory dwelling unit to folks they're not related with. But of course, our folks are mostly looking at something that's going to be done in family. It is important to look up your town's rules. If you can't find them easily on the town website itself, or if you want to look at multiple towns, the New Hampshire Housing website has a great tool for sorting out which towns have which rules on accessory dwelling units. And Dee actually talked quite a bit about home ownership, which is great. Again, the benefits to it are they have the rights of a homeowner. So they get to choose their environment and who's in it. Their voucher assistance is available. The drawback, of course, is it costs money to buy a house, the demands of property management, and the demands of taxes, and particularly in New Hampshire, where local taxes are the main source of revenue for schools. The local taxes can change dramatically if there's a shortfall or if there's a change in budgeting on the state level. So this leaves people again with a non-variable income and with limited resources at the mercy of maybe suddenly having a high tax bill that they can't afford at all. So to help individuals navigate all of these choices and to, we've been starting to put together this webinar, other materials such as our Many Paths to Home materials. And we put together a packet for to help families implement primarily option one, participation in the New Hampshire Housing voucher program. Housing Choice Voucher Program. So we just started off with basic materials to keep it simple. Each housing authority may have its own and likely has its own materials for applying to be part of the program, their own requirements, their own paperwork. Once you've gone through more than one, they may be similar, I don't know. But we strongly recommend that you contact those individual housing authorities if you're interested in trying to secure one of their vouchers. But in this, we just broke it down to the basic information, how the program works, how to approach a landlord. And then we have another document that gives basic information for the landlords, how it works on their end, and a lot of the reasons to rent to a person with disabilities, many of which Dee cited earlier. We also included a section that has links to the different documents that landlords might like to look at, the application materials for New Hampshire Housing, a great handout called it's about a good place to live, that just goes through basically what a house has to, an apartment or a home has to look like to be able to be rented through HUD, through a HUD program. And then we also included all the contact information for the housing authorities across the state. And some information about building accessory dwelling units and about some funding sources for home repairs and renovation, which may be available to use to make alterations to make an accessory dwelling unit. So beyond this, what else is there? Well, we're still looking ahead to see what other types of things can be done, creative solutions. The benefits are we can go outside the box, we can think about new things. People with the resources to pursue these solutions may be able to meet their own individual needs. Some of the drawbacks are, unless things are put together well, to have a shared housing setup of some kind, there can be power disparities. If the person who owns the house is one of the people who are living there, and the other people don't have a rental agreement, they don't have a lease, then there can be a power disparity, or even if there is a lease, there can be some difficulties with that. To put together something that is shared equity housing or another one of these solutions, you need a very strong vision and considerable resources, not just financial necessarily, or the ability to pay people to put these things together. Looking at the projects that folks have done in the state, I can see that there's been a lot of work behind them. For shared equity housing, there are different options. There are community land trusts, there are deed restricted homes, limited equity housing cooperatives, and resident-owned manufactured housing communities. Tiny home villages are not really supported by New Hampshire law right now. Container homes are still very much an individualized solution. I know some people have used them, but they still must meet habitability requirements, which means that outside of an unincorporated area, you may have a really hard time finding a town that will let you build a container home unless you basically use it to replicate a regular home with a slab and everything. So we're looking to get more people wrapped up into our work. The Housing Task Force started in September of 2021 to address the housing crisis in the IDDD community. And for all of you folks who are fired up about the lack of affordable housing, please consider joining our task force. Everybody's welcome to get involved, no matter what your time commitment is, no matter what skills you bring, we'll find a place for you. We meet by Zoom on the second Monday of each month at 7 p.m. We do need people to do many different jobs: research, writing letters, talking to landlords or developers, talking to your town, and many other tasks. So please sign up today, and you can email me at timm@ablenh.org to get involved. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tim. Of course, I'm biased. Able New Hampshire is doing some really important work on housing through the task force, and you know, we need to both be forefronting what exists, and we need to be pulling together all the stakeholders who care about housing for the disability community so that we can come up with some creative solutions. And we are very grateful tonight to have New Hampshire housing staff, DHHS staff, and of course, Able New Hampshire staff here presenting information to families on the basics of what exists and how do we access it. I know that there's been an enormous amount of information shared. I'm just going to take a quick moment to share a flyer example of one of the resources that Able New Hampshire has just put together so that families can go and recruit private landlords. This is one example of the packet that Tim was referencing, and Andrew has put together, Andrew has put the link for the packet in the chat. So I just wanted to take a quick moment to share that. We also, another one is some talking points so that families can be equipped with how to start the conversation with a local landlord. How do you make that happen? What do you say to get someone to become interested who may not know that renters with disabilities are great renters? As a result of the presentations tonight, I found a couple of typographical errors in the handout, so we'll get those edited before we get them out to the community. But that packet is launching tonight, and it's very exciting. And I want to open it up to questions for those who can stay and have their questions answered. So I think we start at the top. Lois Cody asked, is the 811 program implemented only for people with needs regarding mental health? If yes, why? Ignatius, do you have an answer for that?
I do have an answer for that. First, it's a good question. And we at New Hampshire Housing have been trying to think about when another round of 811 is available, how to define kind of which disabilities will be served. So that's number one. It's a good question because HUD requires it for disabled, but it does require it that you show it is for the folks most in need because it's a competitive process. And so this was a program that New Hampshire Housing has done in conjunction with the Department of Health and Human Services, which is a requirement of HUD. And you are required to identify the population of disabled folks most in need of supportive housing and rental assistance. And that was the decision that was made. I would point out that when another notice of funding opportunity comes out, like I said, we can reconsider that, but we would do that in conjunction with the state. That's number one. Number two, you should know that D is good enough to sometimes provide us project-based vouchers from her pool of housing choice vouchers that also go into some of the projects that New Hampshire Housing is developing that could include a broader definition of disability. So that's number one. There was also an ADU question. I will tell you that there right now is no real independent program that I'm aware of to do an ADU. I do know that some local banks are considering, you'd have to get basically a construction loan to do the new ADU. And I do know that both Fannie Mae and FHA allow ADUs to be part of a financing package. But currently there's no specific state program or New Hampshire Housing program on financing of ADUs generally. But it's certainly something we think a lot about, the ADU financing aspect.
It would be interesting to know if DD waiver funds that would be utilized for home modifications could make a contribution to an ADU project. So do we know if that is the case?
And speaking just kind of broadly and generally, I would say if it's the individual's own home, we could pay for the modification itself. It wouldn't be like an amount taken off of the home that was previously modified, if that slight distinction, but with a difference.
And I see that Sandy has a question for Ignatius.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Lisa. So Ignatius, you talked about the Fair Housing Act prior. So I recently attended a housing committee meeting in the town I live with, and there's a robust, they're working on the workforce housing being built in our town. Does workforce housing have to meet any of the fair housing federal requirements, or is it only accessible? What does that Fair Housing Act apply to, I guess, is what my question is.
Yeah, so I'm not a expert on fair housing, just to be clear, but it's my understanding that fair housing, and specifically that memo between HUD and the Department of Justice on fair housing in terms of the local planning project process, it applies across the board. So
Okay.
even if the zoning ordinance or planning ordinance doesn't mention it, that ordinance is subject to fair housing. And if you read the DOJ HUD memo, it specifically says because of the supremacy clause that this applies in all municipalities, all of their ordinances. This is there whether the ordinance itself includes any mention of fair housing.
So it doesn't have to be accessible housing. It could be workforce housing.
Yes, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
if you do workforce housing and
Alright.
somebody came forward and said, hey, we'd like to do a community that will involve this population, the town couldn't say, no, we don't want those people. And I only use that
yeah.
term, those people,
You're right.
because having been to local planning and zoning boards
Yes.
across New Hampshire, that term, those people, applies to a broad category, that's a violation, frankly, of, and can be a violation of fair housing using that particular term. So
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I've experienced that, so I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Thank you. It's important that we use candor in these conversations and just put it in the middle of the room, what the barriers are and how we need to change attitudes. Dinah asks, are there any programs that offer assistance to caregivers to put small addition to their house, change from a room and board situation to an in-law type addition? I think that question was answered already. Yes. Right, Ignatius?
Yes. Yeah, I think the answer is currently there is not, but I will tell you that if this were an issue that folks were really interested in, we should have that discussion, because we have a home ownership team that might be interested in this, and it may be more of there's a need for construction funding to do the work, knowing that you can then refinance to, you know, a Fannie Mae or an FHA loan, and the like. And as I said, we work with some of our community banks, and they're doing ADU financing. I can think of a couple that they do it as part of their normal business, but it's not subsidized
Right.
and the like.
And it would be an excellent activity for the housing task force to take on that conversation and to bring those stakeholders together to really impress upon New Hampshire Housing and banks to say, we need this program built. Because this, you know, if we can demonstrate the data that substantiates that this would have an impact, then I think it's a great conversation to start in. Okay. Lois, her question was answered about the housing, the voucher funding source, and Dee answered it's federally funded by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The number of vouchers is determined by our contract with HUD. New Hampshire Housing applies for new vouchers as they become available. It's often through a competitive funding application. Sandy asks, Dee, did you say that if New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority is contributing monies to a low-income housing tax credit project and someone who already has a voucher and may move to that property, the property cannot refuse their voucher?
That's correct. They can only refuse for tenant selection for references criminal activity. Anything financed by New Hampshire Housing, unless, there's, like Ignatius said, we have project-based vouchers. Some of them are in tax credit properties. So obviously they couldn't use their voucher if the tax credit property had project-based vouchers. So, there are some of those too, but basically, landlords in New Hampshire can legally say no to the voucher program. It's not discrimination. Source of income is not a protected class in New Hampshire. But anything financed by New Hampshire Housing, it's in all our regulatory documents that the owner cannot say no to vouchers.
Great. And Sheila Mulligan, if you are still here, I wonder if you can unmute yourself, or I will unmute you.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Oh, great, Sheila. What's your question?
Oh, I did not have a question.
Oh, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
That was a tech accident.
Oh, okay.
Now is it down again?
Yep, you're good.
Yep. Okay, thank you for calling on me though.
Lori asks for CFI waiver, which requires tenant to pay 30% of their gross income. Do you look at the income monthly or annually? And what happens if there is a change in income, like a job loss?
Does she mean for Melissa, Lori, and Jessica, or about the voucher? If they're CFI, you mean with a voucher, they pay 30% of their adjusted income. That's their portion of the rent. And we look at, to determine their eligibility for the program, we look at their gross annual income. their portion of the rent is based on 30% of their monthly adjusted income. If there is a change in income, like job loss, the voucher participant reports it to their caseworker, so we can do an interim certification and adjust their subsidy.
Great. Another question. Can a family member become a landlord and receive a Section 8 voucher for their family member with a developmental disability?
With New Hampshire Housing, yes. I can't speak for the other housing authorities. What the HUD regulations state that you cannot rent from a relative unless doing so would provide a reasonable accommodation to a person with disability. And you're supposed to connect the two, right? What like the reasonable accommodation, that nexus, what does that provide? And all we say, or the landlord says, the family member, is that, you know, they provide support, transportation. We don't really ask for a lot of reasons, but they can. It's a rental, though. It has to be a rental. They can't live. We've had some owners ask if they can do shared housing and rent the bedroom in their house where they all live to use their family member with a DD to rent the bedroom. And that is not allowed, and there's no, HUD has denied a waiver of that type. So if it's a true rental, yes.
All righty. I think I have read all of the questions in the chat. Does anyone have any other questions they might like to raise their hand or unmute themselves and ask? Not everybody likes to type their questions, so people can ask a question out loud if you want to.
The only thing I wanted to add, it's not a question, but on Tim's handout, which Tim shared with me, and they're really well done, Tim, that incentive is just for New Hampshire Housing, up to $1,000 for New Hampshire Housing. The other housing authorities may or may not offer incentives, but I wouldn't want any landlord you're doing outreach to think they automatically get $1,000. And you know, that's all. There's some things that are specific to New Hampshire Housing that can be confusing to the landlords. That's all.
Thank you.
We will make that edit. All righty, so Owen, ask your question, and then Kelly, you can follow up and ask after Owen's question is answered.
Mute.
There you go, Owen.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have a question because I came in here a little later, so I'm having a little bit of a difficulty separating the housing vouchers that Dee was talking about and the housing and the waivers or vouchers that Ignatius was talking about, and having both of those and how both of them are related but different.
So I'll take a quick shot, Owen, at it, which is, I think Tim put it best, which is these housing programs, while their aim is simple to help people with housing, the regulations behind them are very complex. I mean, I think that's the simple answer to the question. And I think I'll let Dee describe, but for the 811 project-based vouchers that I talked about, kind of start with the Department of Health and Human Services for folks who are 30% AMI or less and severely mentally ill. So that process kind of originates with the Department of Health and Human Services in terms of selecting who would, be eligible. Our job is to work with developers to accept those 811, and they get points from us in a competitive process when they say, hey, we need $1 million to build the housing. We say, well, we'll give you points if you would agree to have some of your units available for folks who need this particular subsidy. So that's our program, and meaning starts with the Department of of Health and Human Services. They work with the individual. We work with the developer to make sure that there are units that would commit to use that assistance. I think that's the simplest I can explain it. And Dee, you may want to handle the housing choice side.
Hi, Owen. I think what Ignatius said, and Tim too, it's how the process originates is a good start.
Okay,
That with the housing choice voucher, you apply with the housing authority, whether it's us or the local housing authority, and you get on a waiting list. And through that application process, there are different programs, preferences, and you can check them all off and you'll be placed on a list, and you wait to be contacted by the housing authority that your name reaches the top of the waiting list, and you can begin the voucher eligibility process.
thank you. Yeah, that's a little bit more clearer. Thank you. It's a lot
Owen,
to
go ahead,
process, but I feel like I'm firmer there.
yeah, I mean, the big key difference, Owen, is we, New Hampshire Housing and other funders, have money to put in to get housing built, capital subsidy.
Yes,
And in that process, folks can get points by making units available. And then your question goes towards kind of the individual getting the rental assistance, and New Hampshire Housing does both.
yeah. And so the one voucher is about the actual construction, and one is about the subsisting in the housing.
One goes into the development. I need to buy some 2x4s. We say, we'll help you do that, but you've got to share that 2x4 with the disabled community. And another one says, now the thing is built, we're going to help you live in that built structure. Yes. Yep. And that's a really important distinction.
Kelly, you're up next.
Okay, I'm on section 8, and once you get the paperwork to get on the list, you have to make sure if you move that they know where you are, because like Dee was saying, if they send you a letter to Main Street and you live on Pine Street, you're not going to know it. And if you don't change your address with the post office, it won't get to you. And once you do get the voucher, you have to reapply every single year. I live in a tax credit, so I have to do it through my landlord, something about the IRS. And then I have to do it with the housing authority because I live in Nashua, and it's a lot of paperwork. And I advise you to get help with it if you need it from like your case manager or your service coordinator, whatever your area agency calls it. But it's a long process, and I was living in an apartment and I have the voucher so I could move to another building. And then I moved to the other building, but I had to wait 1.5 years to get in where I live now. And then the apartment actually did fail inspection, which kind of put things back a little bit. So it's a lot of paperwork, I would say, and let them know once you're on the list where you are and your updated phone number. Sometimes they might call you, things like that. It's a lot of work. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Kelly. That's probably another item that the Housing Task Force wants to look at. How do we streamline the bureaucracy for folks who need support to get the bureaucracy done?
Right.
Thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
Forrest, you have your hand up.
Yes. Just want to know how long is
Forrest, I think I think your connection is unstable.
For some reason, my connection is on.
Do you want to type your question into the chat? Or your comment?
Sure,
Great.
yes.
Do any folks from the Department of Health and Human Services have any clarifying points they want to make in light of other presenters? Just another opportunity to share anything that might have been left out. All set? Okay. I'm going to try to say Forrest, are you typing in your comment? I don't want you to not be heard. In the meantime, I want to thank all of our presenters, Jessica, Lori, Melissa, Deanne, Ignatius, and Tim. This has been an excellent conversation. We will make the link available and we will post it on Able New Hampshire's Facebook page as well as on our website. We have a couple of minor edits to make to that packet, but even if you downloaded that packet tonight, it's good to start reviewing it, even if it needs a few updates. The packet has both flyers with quick information talking points, and then it has detailed Word documents as well. So that are a much extended version of the flyer talking points. And we hope that you will stay active in the conversation on housing for the disability community. We are so glad to be in these conversations with our partners who are caring about the housing crisis that the disability community is facing. And while there is much work to be done, many hands make it light work. And on this 32nd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, I want to thank you all for spending some time with us, for sharing your knowledge. And we look forward to working with all of you in the future. So good night and thank you.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.